My ex and I met at my best friend's B-Day party. I found his house almost destroyed. When I woke up, seeing my ex at a friend's party was awkward, but waking up to a trashed house was a nightmare. What really happened during those lost hours? The discovery was even more shocking. What is true love when there's no love at all? That's the question I find myself asking, staring at the last person I ever wanted to see, my ex-girlfriend, Betty. Hey everyone, I'm Brady, and this is my love story. Now, my ex-girlfriend is the bane of my existence, the one who turned our once fairy tale romance into a living nightmare. We used to be inseparable, the dynamic duo our friends called B&B, but now we hate each other 1,000 times more than we ever loved each other. Recently, I ran into Betty at my buddy Josh's birthday party, and let me tell you, I had the shock of my life when I woke up to a nightmare the next morning. Here's how it started. As I walked into the party, there she was, Betty, chatting animatedly with some guests. The moment she saw me, her face fell, and we locked eyes. I braced myself, knowing this could only end badly. Sure enough, Josh approached with a beer, thinking it'd be a great idea to try and get us to talk. "Hey B&B, I got you guys a drink. Why don't you two come over and talk?" he said, a hopeful grin on his face. But Betty's expression quickly soured. "Talk? With him?" she scoffed, snatching a wine bottle off the nearby table. "I'm gonna break his head now. What is he doing here?" I glared at Josh. "Man, what the hell? You promised she wouldn't be here. Why did you invite her?" The insults started flying, and our friends had to step in to keep us apart. The whole evening was tense, with me and Betty avoiding each other at all costs. I couldn't help but think back to how we ended up in this mess. Several months earlier, Betty and I had met at a friend's wedding in Paris, of all places. It was one of those chance encounters that felt almost too good to be true. We chatted and exchanged numbers, and before long, we were inseparable. "Can you believe it? We met at a wedding in Paris, and now we're here, together," I'd said to her, my heart racing. She'd smiled, those beautiful eyes sparkling. "I know, it's like something out of a movie. I'm so glad I found you, Brady." Those early days were like a fairy tale. Romantic dinners, stolen kisses, and endless laughter. We were head over heels for each other. Then things took a wild turn when we decided to take the plunge and move in together. The close proximity only seemed to amplify our differences. I worked the night shift, while Betty had a 9-to-5 job, so our schedules never quite aligned. "Why aren't you answering my calls? I'm sitting here alone in this empty apartment." Betty would yell through the phone, her voice laced with frustration. "I'm at work, Betty. You know my schedule. Can we talk about this later?" I'd plead, trying to keep my cool. But she wouldn't have it. "No, we need to talk about it now. You're never here when I need you." The fight started small, over silly things like her wanting me to take her to the nail salon when I had an important client meeting. "Brady, it's just a quick trip to the salon. Can't you make time for me?" she'd whine. "Betty, I have a meeting that could make or break this deal. Can't it wait?" I'd argue, already feeling the tension rising. But they quickly escalated, and soon we were at each other's throats over the slightest provocation. The final straw came when Betty yelled at me in front of all my friends. "You're not a better man for me, Brady. You don't keep me happy at all," she'd shouted, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and walked out of the apartment that very evening, breaking up with her for good. Ever since then, we'd been avoiding each other like the plague. But it wasn't easy when you had a lot of mutual friends. That's why I'd mostly steered clear of parties and social gatherings, terrified of running into her again. But when Josh invited me to his birthday bash, I couldn't say no. The guy had been through hell and back because of cancer, and I owed it to him to be there. So I showed up, bracing myself for the inevitable. Now, let's get back to that nightmare of a birthday party where it all started. "What is this loser doing here?" she yelled again, glaring at Josh. Josh, bless his heart, tried to play peacemaker. Whoa, let's all just calm down. "Betty, I thought it would be good for you and Brady to—" "You promised he wouldn't be here. Why did you invite him?" Betty interrupted, her eyes blazing with anger. We ended up in a heated argument again, with our friends trying to keep us from tearing each other apart. The rest of the party was a blur of drinks and music, When I finally woke up the next morning at Josh's place, I was disoriented and had no idea what had happened. But one thing was clear: Josh's kitchen was a complete mess. Cabinets were broken, plates were scattered everywhere, and it looked like a tornado had swept through the place. Betty came in, equally bewildered. "What the hell happened here?" she exclaimed, surveying the destruction. I shook my head, just as confused. "I have no idea. Who did this?" Just then my phone rang. It was Josh, and a shocking truth came out. "You two idiots got into a drunken fight last night and trashed my house," he yelled, his voice tinged with frustration. "The landlord is furious and wants everything fixed by tonight. You better get your asses down there and start cleaning." With time running out, Betty and I reluctantly started cleaning up the mess, constantly bickering and blaming each other. "This is all your fault, you know. If you hadn't shown up, none of this would have happened," Betty snapped, scrubbing a countertop with more force than necessary. "My fault? You're the one who grabbed the wine bottle and started yelling," I retorted, sweeping up shards of broken ceramic. But as we scrubbed and tidied, something started to shift. We realized that if we wanted to make this right, we needed to put our differences aside and work together. Hour after agonizing hour, we poured our hearts into restoring Josh's home to its former glory, determined to make it spotless before the landlord returned. "I can't believe we're doing this. It's like we're a freaking cleaning crew," Betty grumbled, wiping down a shelf. "Well, we wouldn't have to if you hadn't gone all crazy last night," I shot back, wincing as the words left my mouth. Betty paused, and for a moment I thought she was going to start another argument, but instead she let out a heavy sigh. "You're right, I'm sorry, Brady. Let's just get this done, okay?" she said, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Okay!" When our friends showed up that evening, they were amazed at how good the house looked. Then Josh stepped forward, grinning mischievously. "Loved the trick, pal," he said, chuckling. "You two finally talked." At first, Betty and I were furious, ready to tear into Josh and the others. But as we exchanged a glance, something shifted. All the anger and resentment we'd been holding on to seemed to melt away, replaced by a longing for the connection we once shared. Before I could even react, Betty threw herself into my arms, tears in her eyes. "I missed you, idiot," she exclaimed, burying her face in my chest. Our friends cheered, and just like that, the walls between us came crashing down. We may have hated each other, but the truth was, we only hated because we loved each other so deeply. As we held each other, I realized that despite all the ups and downs, Betty and I were back on track. This time, I was determined to do things differently. No more fighting over silly things, no more taking each other for granted. I wanted to cherish every moment and build a lasting love that could withstand the test of time. "You know, we've been through a lot, you and me," I murmured, stroking Betty's hair as she planted a kiss on my forehead. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "I know, but that's what makes us strong, right? We've seen the worst of each other, and we're still here," I nodded, a wave of emotions washing over me. "Yeah, and I don't want to lose that again. I want us to make it work, Betty. For real this time." "Me too," she whispered. "No more fighting, no more taking each other for granted, just you and me, okay?" I pulled her closer, my heart swelling with hope. "Okay." As we walked out of Josh's house hand in hand, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Hope for a future where we could navigate the ups and downs of life together, with more sweet moments than bitter ones. It wouldn't be easy, but if anyone could make it work, it was us. B&B, the dynamic duo, reunited and ready to take on the world. Here's another story. My mom was locked up in a closet during my wedding. But the real shock arrived when we discovered who did it and why. This work is inspired by real events and people, but it has been fictionalized for creative purposes. Names, characters, and details have been changed to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental and not intended by the author. The author and publisher make no claims to the accuracy of events or the portrayal of characters, and are not liable for any misinterpretation. This story is provided as is, and any opinions expressed are those of the characters and do not reflect the views of the author or publisher.